Welcome to Performance Assessment. I'd like to shape our investigation of performance assessment around 5 essential questions. First of all, what is it? Secondly, when and where did it originate? Third, why the interest now? Fourth, what are the concerns and the critical issues? And fifth, how is it practiced? Our first question was, what is it? On a larger scale, we can think of assessment in two ways. Traditional assessment requires a student to select a response from a true-false, short answer, matching, or multiple choice item. And then what's sometimes called performance assessment, or authentic assessment, or alternative assessment. And all of these require a student to shape or create a response rather than just selecting a response. Let's now look at an even more specific definition of what performance assessment is. Performance assessment focuses on students' processes, products, or performances as they engage in specific behaviors on significant tasks. That behavior is then assessed according to a set of predetermined criteria. The context may or may not be a real-life context. In this slide, I've underlined what I feel are the critical attributes of the definition. Please take a look at these. The when and where of performance assessment is interesting. The when dates back to the time of Christ. You can be quite sure that as Christ was working with his disciples, he didn't give them a multiple-choice Scantron test. Rather, he sent them off in groups of 2 to preach the gospel, a performance assessment, and when they returned from this real experience, he engaged in dialogue with them about the experience. You can also be quite sure that Socrates wasn't giving his pupils matching items to assess their progress. He engaged in Socratic discussion with them. Performance assessment was actually the assessment norm until the age of mechanization, when American educators invented faster and supposedly more efficient ways of assessment. In other words, multiple choice, true-false, matching, and short answer. So, the origins were actually worldwide, and performance assessment continues to be practiced in all countries of the world. A few nations in particular have an impressive history using performance assessment. The Canadians, the British, the Italians, Germans, Russians, Dutch, for example, routinely demand high-quality documents and oral performances, even in mathematics. In the United States, we have a long-standing history of using performance assessment in certain disciplines. For example, PE, art, music, foreign language, driver's ed, shop, drama, home economics, etc. Performance assessment was truly a grassroots movement that is here to stay in my estimation. So, why the interest now? The first argument is that traditional testing methods don't adequately measure the type of complex higher-level thinking that's required in today's rapidly changing world. Albert Shanker once said that 50 years ago, for everyone to read and do basic math would have been victory itself. But now, as society has become more complex, the requirements for basic participation have risen. The bottom line is that no traditional assessment method, with the possible exception of multiple choice items, can measure the ability to synthesize information, think critically, problem solve, and work cooperatively in groups and communicate effectively. The second argument is that our understanding of current learning theory, specifically constructivism, suggests that we build neural networks by engaging in meaningful learning experiences. Performance assessments, proponents would argue, are actually learning experiences that profit students in and of themselves. The third argument is that if we have high-quality assessments that we're working toward, teaching to the test if you want to call it that, then we'll have more meaningful instruction. The fourth argument is that students tend to be more motivated by real-life experiences, which good performance assessments tend to be. Then they are motivated by canned lessons and traditional assessments. So, what are the concerns and the critical issues? Let's look at these. The concerns are that some teachers aren't properly prepared to design and use performance assessments, and that there can be problems with validity and reliability and generalizability. Generalizability refers to the ability to confidently assess a larger body of knowledge or skill based on a smaller sampling obtained in the performance assessment. Although Werthan's 12 issues date back to 1993, the concerns are still valid. You can look at the issues on this slide and the next, and then I'll comment on just a few. Number 1 talks about how there is still no official canon about how performance assessment should be written. Number 5 refers to the fact that we still don't have commonly agreed upon methods of making judgments about performance assessments. And number 6 speaks to the fact that there's no guarantee a performance assessment will truly measure complex thinking skills unless the instructor builds it that way with intentionality. Both 7 and 8 speak to the issue that performance assessments may never be fully accepted until they can be used with confidence by all stakeholders. In other words, parents, school administrators, school board members, legislators, etc. Number 11 and 12. We still don't fully know how technology can be used with performance assessments, and how we're going to avoid having companies like ETS, Educational Testing Service, really take over the industry and monopolize it. So, how can performance assessment be practiced, especially since we don't have a clearly defined way to go about it? I'd like to suggest this basic outline for constructing performance assessments. The design is something I created, published, and personally use in all of my work. All the assignments in this course, for example, are built using this model. The process begins with an outcome or outcomes that are listed for one or more SLOs. Personally, I recommend grouping together as many SLOs as is reasonably possible. After the outcomes, you'll have the performance criteria, which is indicators of success. Then you have the performance process, which is what the students will do. Then you have the performance judgment, how the process will be judged and by whom. And then you have the performance feedback, how the feedback will be provided. The features I like about the model are that it gets us thinking about key criteria before we think about what students will be doing. Additionally, I like that it requires us to think about what's best for how the process will be judged and by whom, and how the feedback will be provided. You'll learn the specifics of how to write performance assessments in the JING, Writing Performance Assessments, and then you'll see 10 sample performance assessments. These models will be helpful as you create 2 performance assessments for this module. Even though performance assessment can be fun to think about and plan for, I'd like to finish with this thought. Let us not lose sight of what performance assessment is all about. Like the golfer or the tennis player, if we take our eye off the ball, we have difficulty playing the game well. Performance assessment is not the ball in the education game. The ball is student learning. Performance assessment is simply some new thinking about how the game can be played better and more successfully.